I grew up listening to brass playing all around me. My parents were both brass musicians, both professional horn players, and my brother and sister also played as well and still do. So it was kind of inevitable that I was going to do it because everyone else was doing it around me, you know, and it's fantastic, and I'm glad I did. My dad took me down to his local band. I stayed there for 2 or 3 years, and it kind of went on from there, really. I think that's quite a key thing. The brass bands played a very important part in my musical development, which of course is still ongoing because you know, carry on developing as you acquire new experiences and do new things, you know. But brass bands were brilliant because there was always something to play. You're always playing. Met some fantastic people. Everyone does it because they love it, and that was really fantastic to be around people like that from a very early age. The brass banding scene isn't as huge down here in London. You know, I'm a Manchester lad, so I used to play with quite a lot of bands up there. And when I go home, occasionally I pop down and have a little blow, you know, with the bands. And it's fantastic. You know, it's great fun, and it kind of reminds you where you've been, and it's some absolutely fantastic bands. You know, still amazed at the standard of playing in some of the bands. You know, and lovely people as well. So. I do try and get down to bands when I come home, yeah, certainly. The story behind the Yamaha instrument is what I've played on from quite an early age, you know. My teacher, Andrew Berryman, at the time suggested that I try his Yamaha that he was playing, and I then very quickly proceeded on to go and buy one. I bought his actually off him, and it's terrific, and I found it did every style, and it made the sort of sound that I wanted to make, and I've been on it ever since. I like a very direct and a very warm sound, but also direct, and you don't have to put a load of air into it to make it work, which you do on some other instruments. And Yamaha, very free blowing, and technically do everything you generally need to do. I think there's nothing more to it than that, really. Personally thinking back, I was inspired by going to watch the bands, and then I got into the orchestral stuff and all the rest of the jazz, you know, the orchestral, the solo stuff. That was later. The bands were the first thing for me. Not to say that you know there aren't different ways of doing it, but in an orchestra, the trombones don't play an awful lot of the time, maybe as much as a violinist would or a cellist. Certainly not. So I think. Not if you're a young kid, you wouldn't notice something like that, but I think if you see something happening all the time, you suddenly become interested in it. I've always found the LSO quite relaxing. You know, everyone knows in that orchestra that you come in and you play to the best of your ability and put yourself in the best possible position to do that. Whether it's doing your hours practice the week before, the day before, whatever it is. When you sit down, you know you've got to play at the highest possible level you can. And that's what I love about it most, I think. Wherever you look around the orchestra, there's great players on the end of chairs, in the middle of sections, everywhere. And people have worked quite hard to get to where they are, so it's quite a rewarding place to work, I think. I don't like to think of myself as strictly an orchestral player. I like to carry on doing as many other styles and different things as I can, including the solo work. The solo work I absolutely love. I love standing out the front, doing concerts, whatever they are. You know, I love standing out the front. So that's something I'd really want to continue as hopefully my career develops. I would say, speaking to young people, I would say, if you know that you want to be a player, maybe an orchestral player, maybe a solo player, still carry on listening to all the different styles and all the different genres of music, because you never know when you might suddenly become very interested in another one. And the more tools you have, the better prepared you're going to be if you suddenly decide to go and do something else. It's about the exposure. It's companies like Yamaha, you know, putting on events. It's about exposure and exposing people to music that they wouldn't have heard. You know, they can't make a decision whether they'd like to be a musician if they've never seen it or heard it. They've got to see one of these events, or something in the street even, or a band or a jazz band or an orchestra. They've got to see it to to know they like it or maybe want to do it. I know that if I work hard, and I've been looking at my playing recently and maybe practicing for something coming up, I know that this instrument has everything I need for it to work well if I've prepared well, if that makes sense. That's probably the best way of putting it. It has everything there, and you've got to do the work to make it come out, because it doesn't just do it. But all the facilities are there on this instrument, yeah.